No centro desta revolução estava a música. Os americanos queriam música alta, clara e em estéreo. Uma nova geração estava se ligando em uma nova onda e com som estereofônico.
If you go back to the 60s, what you see happening is you see audio or stereo becoming a mass market phenomenon, moving from a hobbyist mode in the late 50s, early 60s to something that everyone could use and appreciate. And, by the time the late 60s rolled around, stereo was the word for a complete system.
O AR1 revolucionara os alto-falantes, colocando muita potência em uma pequena caixa. O transistor faria o mesmo pelo amplificador.
A transistor is basically a switch, but if it's configured the right way, it can actually amplify the sound.
O transistor funcionava como uma válvula. O sinal de áudio entrava na válvula ou no transistor, que dizia a fonte de força no amplificador quanta energia enviar ao alto-falante. O transistor muito menor era igualmente eficiente.
Before the transistor, you had to use vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes were big, they were cumbersome, they put out a lot of heat. The heat would create problems with the other components in the box. You'd need output transformers, so the things were very heavy, very complicated. Once you had solid state, once you had a transistor involved in it, the heat was gone, the transformer was gone, you could put these things together very inexpensively in a very small package, and you'd have portability and reliability, and that made audio available to everybody.
O transistor estabeleceu a nova tendência. Aparelhos pequenos, com muito som. Companhias como a KLH, criada por Henry Clough, usaram métodos geniais para construir pequenas e potentes caixas.
I had learned of a way to make luggage, structural pieces. Garrard Company in England finally made a really good changer. These things came together in what was then called Model 11. It was the first use of power transistors for a consumer product that I know of. Small speakers, small power amplifier, all put in a case you could carry around.
What KLH did in the 1960s was to popularize the stereophonic concept. They made the suitcase stereo that practically everybody took to college with them, and made stereo into a wide-scale consumer phenomenon from the hobbyist phenomenon it had been at an earlier time.
Americanos adoravam a conveniência. Queriam a música unida a seus estilos de vida e interesses. A gravação caseira há muito era dominada pelos entusiastas, mas Ray Dolby mudaria isto. Dolby nasceu na Califórnia. Estudante genial e amante da música, foi engenheiro da Ampex nos anos 50. Dolby era fascinado pelo problema do ruído de fita, um barulho criado pelas propriedades naturais do som.
Sound waves differ in two basic parameters. They differ in frequency, which is how many times a second the sound is vibrating. The more times it vibrates, the higher the pitch. And they vary in intensity or amplitude. A very weak sound vibration, low amplitude or low intensity, we generally say amplitude, is a very soft sound. A very high amplitude sound is a very loud one. In fact, an audio signal, like the sound of my voice, is very complex because at any given moment, you're hearing a bunch of different frequencies at different amplitudes.
Em 1967, Dolby resolvera o problema do ruído da fita. O sistema de redução de ruído Dolby dependia de um complexo circuito, que excluía algumas frequências e manipulava o sinal. No final, o ruído era eliminado da fita.
The simplest way to think about how Dolby noise reduction works is to think of it as a kind of compressor. But unlike conventional compressors, which lower the loud signal, this is the kind of broadcast compressor we're used to, what happens with Dolby noise reduction is that before the signal is recorded onto the tape, the low-level signals are brought up instead of the high-level signals being brought down. The signal is recorded that way onto the tape. Then in playback, the decoder leaves the high-level signals untouched again, but takes down the low-level signals, restoring the original dynamics. But of course, the playback unit can't tell the difference between the low-level signals and the tape hiss. So the hiss goes down along with the low-level signals. The original signal is completely restored.
O primeiro sistema, chamado Dolby A, era caro e usado apenas por profissionais.
Many good recordings were made in the late 1960s with Dolby A noise reduction, and they drew the attention of Henry Close, who, upon hearing this, got on an airplane to London the next day and went to see Ray Dolby and tried to talk him into a consumer system.
Quando a Philips introduziu a fita cassete em 1963, muitos o viram como uma mídia barata e de baixa qualidade. Henry Close achava que ela precisava apenas de uma ajudinha do sistema de Dolby.
Henry Close saw that this small new medium that Philips had introduced as a dictation medium called the cassette, when combined with chromium dioxide tape made by DuPont and companding noise reduction, Dolby B, could be a viable music format. He pushed the limits of the envelope of a newly introduced technology for one purpose into a whole different purpose, and came up with a medium that is one of the most ubiquitous on earth.
Pela primeira vez, o consumidor podia não apenas ouvir, mas gravar sua música. A qualidade do equipamento estéreo estava melhorando. O consumidor esperava aparelhos cada vez melhores. O estéreo vai ao cinema. Nos anos 70, o som estéreo nos filmes era possível, mas não era mais prático.
There was a stereo process out there in the film industry, which is 4-track magnetic, which is used on 35mm prints. And in this process, in addition to the picture, there are 4 mag tracks striped across the film.
The good theaters would have 6 or 4 tracks of magnetic tape that would have to be attached to the sides of the film and then run through a recorder one at a time. It was fragile. If the film broke and you spliced it together, you'd have all kinds of blips. It was very problematic.
Ray Dolby e Joan Neylan tinham certeza de que o sistema Dolby podia ser muito útil para Hollywood.
I started visiting film studios saying, "Good afternoon, would you like to buy my noise reduction?" And was more often than not greeted by blank looks and stares and no thank you very much. And in fact, our experiments adding noise reduction revealed no great improvement. And I started examining why, and this led to a lengthy program of looking at the whole film sound chain.
Descobriram que o sistema de redução de Dolby resolvia apenas parte do problema. Precisavam encontrar um meio de gravar 4 canais em uma única trilha ótica.
Dolby Labs used a technique that had been left over from the quadraphonic era to stuff 4 channels worth of information into 2 tracks available on the film soundtrack. By using this quadraphonic technique but turning it around in a whole new way, they reinvent multi-channel surround sound with 3 front channels, left, center, and right, and a monaural surround sound channel.
O sistema Dolby melhorou drasticamente o som dos cinemas.
We were moderately successful with A Star is Born in the theaters, and it was apparent that the Dolby stereo was going to catch on. And we were fortunate to meet with Gary Kurtz and George Lucas, who determined that Star Wars should be released with a Dolby stereo format, which of course did us a great deal of good in the theaters, because Star Wars was probably the first exposure that 99% of their audiences had ever had to stereo in a theater.
O versátil sistema Dolby poderia ser utilizado por projetores novos e velhos, que lhe rendeu popularidade entre os espectadores e donos dos cinemas. O Dolby e o Multiplex estavam atraindo o público novamente. Então veio o revolucionário design de Tom Hallman, chamado Tom Hallman Crossover, conhecido como THX.
What I realized was something of all places from rock and roll road shows. What rock and roll road shows show is that as you move from venue to venue, the sound is different and always affected by the venue. So the only way to get the movie to sound the same in different venues was to have control over the acoustics.
Considerando todos os fatores acústicos como a reverberação e eco das salas, o THX dava a cada cinema acústica idêntica e uniforme. Para o público, é o melhor desempenho sonoro possível. Assim como fantasia nos anos 40 levou uma evolução, o estéreo nos filmes revolucionaria o estéreo em casa nos anos 80. A revolução digital estava próxima.